Hi, my name's Anna, and today I'm going to talk to you about some simple activities you can do at home in the field of assembly line work, materials handling, and packaging. I've got two activities for you today, and both of my activities are things you probably have around the house or could throw together if you just think a little bit creatively. The first activity is something that is, it's what we call a task box. It's a box where we've got an activity all contained in and of itself. And this task box was intended originally to teach people to take their own medication and to manage their own medicine every day and every week, because that is a work skill that is important at many jobs, being able to take your own medicine and do that on an ongoing basis without anyone else's help, especially if you have to take it in the middle of the day. So we started this activity to teach people to put one pill in every box for each day. But today I'm looking at it more in terms of being able to put one piece of material in each container, which is something that you might do if you worked on an assembly line. So if you have a pill box at home, this is a great thing to be practicing with because it includes also fine motor skills. You have to be able to open and shut those compartments in order to fill them. So that's a good first option. If you don't have a pill box, you could also use an empty egg carton. It wouldn't have that same fine motor component, but it would still allow you to practice with one-to-one correspondence, meaning you put one item for every one box that you count. So you would just start with something. I have these simple glass beads here that would be from like a crafting supply of some sort. You could do it with rocks, you could do it with buttons, you could do it with just about anything you have around the house. But the idea is you start by opening up every compartment, and you do that all the way down. And then you would put one piece in every box, and then you would shut the box as you go. Now, I would start out by putting one in each, and then to differentiate it or to make it a little more difficult, you could then start putting two items in each box. And that's a skill that is important and somewhat difficult for my students sometimes, especially if we're working an assembly line and we're taking, let's say we're filling bags with food and we're taking one of these items, but then we need two granola bars in there. Sometimes that's really challenging. So we practice putting different numbers of things in boxes, and we practice switching it up from time to time. That way they can learn to be flexible with amounts during packaging practice. So that's a really simple activity, and it's got two purposes. It is learning to take your own medication or manage your own medication, and it's also packaging or materials handling. As you are doing these activities, it's important. I always work hard to drive home that this is work related. Students may not know, they may not know that this is connected to a work skill. So I would say this is a packaging activity, just like if you were to work at a hardware store, or just like if you were to work on an assembly line, you would be packaging items, and that's what we're doing today. I would treat it just like a workstation where we would have things set up, and that's all that is in the station. I would make sure you come in and maybe you clock in, maybe you dress for work, maybe you shake hands with your boss as you come in and sit down. So I try and make that as work-related as possible. You can do this with really any sort of items, but the more it looks like a work task, the more a person is going to connect that to their future job. So that said, that's our first task box, and that's an option. One thing that is kind of nice about a task box is if you have a couple of task boxes set up, after you have taught those a couple of times, then a student can come in and they can do that task box independently, as if you would do your job independently on an assembly line or something like that. You would come in to your workstation, set it up, and know immediately what I'm supposed to do at my workstation and just get started. So that is our first task box. The next one is a little more complex, and it also gives us a lot more options for practicing work skills. This is a task box that I have made from things that I collected from my hardware store and my home. And while I did go to the hardware store and buy bolts and nuts and different things, you could probably find most of this in your, like in a screw bucket in your shop or your garage. And it wouldn't have to be nuts and bolts and whatever. It could be maybe you've got a bunch of toothpicks and who even knows? Just a bunch of little things that you can find several of that look the same, maybe in your kitchen, maybe in your bathroom, whatever. Think about things that are packaged, that you purchase packaged, and how you could emulate that. So this is, I'm now going to take the screen down, and you're not going to see my face as much. You're going to see what I'm doing here at the table, hopefully. So I'm starting with, I've got a tray here, and I'm going to have my workstation all set up on this tray. And what I had put together was a bunch of just different loose parts, like I said. And when we started this activity, I had my students, I had gotten these little containers at the dollar store that have a lid that snap on. They were 12 for $1, so that was a handy thing for me to have. But you could also do it with, I've gotten out some cupcake liners here that you could use. I've got instead some medicine cups that I got from our school nurse that you could use. And then I also have these just little spice bowls that I had in my kitchen. Any one of those would work for this activity. The first thing that we do is the simplest. We take all of the loose parts that I've got here, and then I set out several bowls that I would like my student to use to sort things. And let me just get, just one moment, 2 more bowls here. So what I do is I get several bowls, I set them out, and then I would have them sort all of those. Let me see if I can do that. Okay. I would have them sort the items into separate bowls. So I would leave it all in there a mess. If you've got, if you know somebody who can easily take things apart, maybe you give it to them already put together and they have to disassemble it and sort it. But in any case, I like all of my bowls to be of the same style, even if they are not all the same color. If you had a bunch of different kinds of bowls here, that would be visually confusing, and it adds one more thing that a person has to sort through. So I try not to do that. So once you've got a bunch of different items and they are sorted into containers, then the first way that I do this activity when I'm working with students is I would set up all my empty containers, like my empty cups, over here on one side. And without even talking about it, I might start by saying something like, today we're doing packaging. We're learning packaging. Watch me. And then I would just then I would say, now you do. Now, in the scenario where I'm teaching this, I would have all of my parts sorted into the bowl, so there would be a bunch in each bowl of the same type of thing. So the first way I would practice this is to have them just putting one of each item into a container. I might practice that a couple of different ways. Maybe we are putting 2 bolts and a nut and a pin all in one container. So maybe we're not just doing one of each item. Maybe it's 2 of one item, 1 of 2 other items. Practice that several different ways until you know that the person who is doing the activity has the skill of getting the items into the cup, and if you're using a cup with a lid, putting the lid on and shutting it. Ideally, after every activity, you would say, good job, you've completed your work for this task. And then you would say your next job is to disassemble what you have just made. So you would take the lids off and have them sort the items back into the bowls that they have still have in front of them. The next job I would have then is I'd start to mix up assembling the parts together. So I had gotten these pins and these little tubes, and one of the jobs I had my students do was to put the tube on the pin and then go ahead and put the pin into the container with the lid on. And again, we practice that over and over until I think they're comfortable with it. It's less that this item and this item are going to be packaged together somewhere, more so that that's a good fine motor skill. It's the idea of assembling and following a model that you have made and completing a task over and over by themselves, because that's something you would be doing on an assembly line. If you're curious, the sign for assembly line is this. And I've taught my students, we're working on an assembly line today, and I have them do that action as well. So another thing you can do is take a bolt and put some different washers on there and a nut and have them screw that on. Screwing items together is a good fine motor skill because you have to learn which way things screw on and which way they screw off. It's also good because it causes you to have to follow a certain order. So if you were working on an assembly line or in a packaging type job, it would be important that you do the same order every time. So this time I have put a black rubber washer, I've put a metal gear on, and then a bolt, and I've screwed that on, and then I would put it in the container. If at any point you are doing something like this and it seems like it's too much of a struggle or it's just overwhelming, take it back to the last step that you knew they were successful at and continue with that and build up slowly, just like that. You might even do, as you're having somebody work at a workstation and they are completing these tasks and following the same pattern every time, you might have a section where they set their completed work, and maybe you were to draw trace circles around the bottom of the thing and have a template where they're putting their completed things on that template, and so then they know when they're finished. Another good thing that we've done as a group is we sit down in a true assembly line, and I have several students in a row, or if I was doing this at home, I would do this with my children, and each person has a task. So each person has an assigned workstation, and maybe my job is I pick up the bolts and I put on the rubber washer. Ooh, put on the rubber washer, and then I set it next to the next person, and then their job is to find the bolt and to put the bolt on, and then they set it down, and then the next person is going to put it into the container and put the lid on. So you can do this as an activity that one person works on all by themselves, and that would be a materials handling or a packaging job. And then you could also do it as an assembly line where you're working with multiple people. There are lots of good YouTube videos about tours of factories that you can show ahead of time, and sometimes that's helpful for a person to see what type of a job that they are getting ready to practice, to have a concrete visual for that. This is a really simple activity, but I've been surprised how much my students have enjoyed it and how much learning has happened as we've done this at school. And again, it's not about any one material so much as it is about learning that process and about building on skills and making it more complex every time you practice it. So I hope you enjoy this video about materials handling, and I hope you enjoy practicing. Have a good day.